I'd just like to start off by thanking everyone here for coming. I know this is a really important issue, and I'm sure these important issues hopefully mean a lot to you as well, and that's why you're here. This event has been a goal of mine since the start of the year, when I learned I would get the opportunity to do something like this in my role as Women's Officer at the Student Union. And I think it's really because of the Student Union that this event has been able to be put on as well. So I might just start off by letting our panel guests introduce themselves. So we'll just start off with Chelsea.
Okay, so can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. I'm Chelsea. I'm a dietitian. I'm working at Centre for Integrative Health, so that's with Kira. We look after clients who are living with eating and body image concerns, and I work as part of the psychology multidisciplinary team. So I find the work we do really rewarding, and it's really nice to work with the clients I work with. So I guess I'm really passionate about this kind of topic in terms of body image and eating disorder awareness, because I've seen kind of how it can really affect people's lives.
Yeah, so we have the slides in a certain order. So I might just go to Katie next.
Oh no. Hi, I'm Katie. I'm just finishing up my Masters in Psychology here at UQ. I've managed to drag that out to a 5-year degree instead of a 2-year degree. In that time, I have also been working at Headspace Centre in youth mental health. I work specifically in the area of eating disorders and trauma. I've also got a lived experience of recovery from anorexia nervosa, as well for me, I identify as disabled and chronically ill. I live with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
Great, we'll go to Sophie next.
My name is Sophie. I am also a dietitian. I work in private practice, and I see predominantly clients with disordered eating as well as gut health as well. I guess I'm really passionate about body image and eating disorder awareness, because I have struggled with disordered eating myself in the past when I was in my early teens or late teens and that kind of thing. So I think that's kind of why I'm really, really passionate about helping other people who exhibit signs of disordered eating as well.
Great. Kira?
Hi, I'm Kira Buchanan. I'm a clinical psychologist and health psychologist at Centre for Integrative Health. And I think Chelsea already spoke to us and what we do far more eloquently than I can.
Right, Bridget.
Hi everyone. I was that person who messaged Greta yesterday to say, there's no body diversity on the panel. And then I got a message this morning saying, we've had an opening on the panel, can you come? And I was like, okay, I guess so. I'm going to practice what I preach. I've been on my own body image journey, and I practice within my own life. I have a delivery science approach. I'm a Master of Counselling student here at UQ and hope to work with people in bigger bodies moving forward.
Great. Well, we might start off with the first question. So I'll just give a bit of context. In a world where we're given information 24/7, it can be hard not to get sucked into the latest trends, especially when it comes to eating habits and body image. Celebrity diets, social media, before and afters, fitness trends, weight loss shakes, diet pills, and the list goes on. All of these things can fill our minds with a certain perception about food, which can be harmful in the long run. The first question to the panel is, and whoever would like to answer this first, if feels welcome, how would you define diet culture and where did it come from?
I guess there's a definition of diet culture by Christy Harrison. She's a dietitian in the States, and she calls it the life thief. So that's a really good definition, I think, because it kind of takes a lot of things away from people. So I guess in terms of diet culture, it's those kind of external rules and things you have to follow rather than your own internal cues, I guess. It's just getting on in your insecurities and telling you all these things you have to do to be better. So it kind of takes away a lot from you in that way. I guess there's a lot to it. I guess there's a lot, probably everyone has a different definition of diet culture and it shows up differently for everyone, but it's kind of like that. It's kind of like Western culture. I don't know. Yeah, that's probably.
It's also like what is it, like $70 billion industry or something like that. So it is like a very like consumerist, I guess, kind of idea where they're always trying to sell you something, and it's always like it's never going to be enough. It's always, buy this and you'll be better, but 95% of the time it fails. So you're kind of back to square one. Like, what else can I buy that's going to fix my issue, which diet culture has convinced you that you have, which is not actually a fact.
I was just going to add to that, Tony Ferguson, the weight loss shake guy, is actually on record for saying he has the most successful and effective business model, because when his product fails, which it consistently does, people blame themselves, not the product, and buy more of the product. So he's got a business that's just guaranteed repeat business. So all it does is just keep people feeling insecure and bad about themselves, which is one of, I guess, like the maintaining factors of diet culture. It's not there to make anyone feel good about themselves. It profits off everyone's insecurities.
And I think also, it sells the idea of an ideal body, but the ideal body has changed over time. So it's always saying, you've got to change to this, you've got to change to that. Like we think about the 90s, it was kind of that stick thin, and now it's looking at curves in the right places and things that are very unachievable for 99.9% of the population.
I thought I might just add what diet culture sounds like, and it's kind of that, oh, I'm been good today, I won't eat that. Commenting on people's bodies, oh, you look great, have you lost weight? Exercising with the intention to go and, oh my God, I ate that food, I need to burn it off. And also, holding on to clothes because, I'll fit them again one day.
I think that what you've said right there is so relatable for so many people as well. Might move on to the next question. So it's looking at social media. So most of us are pretty connected to our phones and media 24/7, I'd say. We know that 82.7% of the population in Australia uses social media, and that's almost 100 when we look at young people. So the question is, what role does social media play in perpetuating fat phobia and the skinny ideal? And if you could perhaps elaborate on what those concepts mean as well.
I think it plays like a very, very large role in perpetuating diet culture, because especially now that we're constantly on our phones, we've constantly got access to social media. It's not just, the early 2000s where it was like, oh, you'd see a magazine and it was, shaming people on the front page and saying, oh, look at these bad beach bodies and all of that kind of thing. Now it's a lot more subtle in a way that, you're constantly exposed to bikini photos and like things like that, where people have edited their bodies and they're, perpetuating this idea of like a perfect body, which is so unachievable and just not even real.
I would answer, I think social media has some benefits. I know, like when I kind of work with families, for example, I find that younger people are a lot more aware of social justice issues, and it seems to be some of the information that's more widely accessible on social media, and there might be concepts and ideas that maybe their parents aren't so aware of. And I think if we're thinking about I think we can use social media for good as opposed to bad. But I also think that it's diet culture and internalized thin ideal and weight and fat stigma and phobia is more of a medicalized issue. And if we could, I guess, like influence medical practitioners and our medical field, I think that would have a much bigger impact on society and body image issues than trying to keep young people off social media.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's like keeping people away from it, but I think it definitely depends on the person, and they curate who they follow, what they see, and if they're curating a certain type of feed, then that's going to influence them more negatively or more positively. So I think it is like super tricky to know how it's going to affect people as well.
Yeah. And I find it's definitely about, as you kind of said, filtering that content. And I've noticed even when I work with clients, when they're starting to become more unwell, they will actually start to then seek out that content that triggers them rather than necessarily have been triggered by that content in the first place. Yeah. Though generally I find a lot of young people are coming in with more body dissatisfaction. Whether that is related to social media or not, it's probably hard to say. It's probably playing some role as well, but it's also creating a bit of almost like life dissatisfaction as well, which probably then further perpetuates, if I'm not eating and skinny and achieving this ideal body, then I'll be happy.
I think I'd echo what Sophie and Kira have said around, like, create the feed that you want to see, create the feed that you look at and it makes you feel good. For me, social media has provided an avenue, there's a really positive fat community, and also it's given me an opportunity to identify myself and others where mainstream media wouldn't have offered that.
Yeah, great. I think that's so true as well. Social media can be what you make it. The next question was kind of informed by talking to some students who were interested in the panel and perhaps not heard of diet culture before. So the question is diet culture just about body types or is it about something more?
I'll have a go at this one. It's about power and oppression. It needs to be considered as a social justice issue, just as there are other minority groups. People in bigger bodies are a minority group. So it goes beyond their physical size, and it's what do people think of fat people? They're lazy, they don't have any self-control. So it's beyond their physical appearance, and it starts to imply who they are as a person.
I have some really great stuff. Yeah.
Do we have anything else to add to that?
I feel like that really summarizes honestly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense as well. So the panel's kind of split into 3 sections, and we've just covered what is diet culture. So the next looks at the harms of diet culture and what that means. So generally it's well known that there are many stereotypes surrounding eating disorders, and not everyone knows how eating disorders often present. What do you think eating disorders look like and how do they affect people's lives? And can you also explain the difference between eating disorders and disordered eating?
So I guess the second half of the question, the difference between eating disorder and disordered eating, I would say it's kind of like a spectrum. So you start with very healthy relationship with food, doesn't really have any negative or positive thoughts about food, it's just kind of neutral. And then I guess you kind of go down that spectrum and it gets to the point where it's, a full-blown eating disorder where it's, can be clinically diagnosed, it's very, very negatively affecting someone's life and it's essentially consuming their life. I would say disordered eating is, somewhere kind of in the middle of that spectrum between normal eating and an eating disorder where, they may have, signs and symptoms of an eating disorder, but it may not be to the point where it's, to the extent of an eating disorder, essentially. So they may have, some negative thoughts and some negative behaviours around food or around their body, but it's not essentially to the diagnosable point of an eating disorder, is how I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what makes it really, we're wanting to stick to the kind of question. You can't tell whether someone has an eating disorder just by looking at them. An eating disorder can present in any age, gender, body size, ethnicity. So there's nothing that we can see that would tell us that someone's eating disorder or not. But I also think part of what makes it hard for people to be aware and take seriously when someone does have an eating disorder is that disordered eating is so prevalent. So the vast majority of the population at some point in their time have probably had a form of disordered eating, and because they feel for them that it's not severely impacting their lives in eating that way, and they can kind of downplay what they're doing, I think then people who have a clinical diagnosable eating disorder, their experience then kind of gets downplayed as well because disordered eating is so common.
And I know from my personal experience that we people with eating disorders tend to then downplay it in their mind and be like, well, if everyone else is doing this, I must be fine. And it's then a barrier to actually reach out and get treatment, is that you worry that professionals aren't actually going to take you seriously, whether or not you look sick or not. It's generally kind of in your head that, oh, I'm just not sick enough, because people won't recognise that I am sick, so I've got to get worse before I can actually reach out and get the help.
And I think at the same time, like, we don't notice the disordered eating, but we also praise it a lot of the time in diet culture. So it's kind of like, oh, I'm not doing anything wrong, I'm doing the right thing. And I think especially in, you know, probably Bridget, you might have more experience in this area, but people living in bigger bodies, they kind of, if they're on a diet or something, people are probably more likely to say that that's a good thing due to weight stigma and things like that, rather than if someone's like, you can physically see them malnourished, rather than if someone's malnourished but you can't physically see it. I think that's another thing that's really makes it hard to recognise, and I think it's just we need to know the signs in terms of behaviour rather than what it looks like. So I guess, like, if you're not really aware of what it might look like, if someone's not, you know, their self as they usually not as much energy, or if they're not like socialising as much as they like to, if they're avoiding things around food, or like they're maybe exercising things more than they would usually. Those are kind of things in terms of behaviour to look out for. Because, yeah, they can be subtle, but if they're changing demeanour, it's probably just ask if they're going okay, I guess.
Yeah, I've got a lot of experience of like my behaviours being praised. Like, I'd be at the gym several times a day and it was like, oh, look at you, you're so dedicated, not why aren't you doing anything else than coming here for hours. Like, I had someone, I was on the verge of hospitalisation, say to me, oh, but your body's so ideal. And then that makes it so much harder to then be like, to hear everyone else saying, well, you've got to gain weight because you're underweight. And it's like, no, everyone's telling me I've done the right thing.
Yeah.
And not even in my eating disorder, but also dealing with my chronic illness. Just for a bit of background, my digestive system doesn't function properly. So that in itself has caused weight loss. And I've had people tell me, oh, you're looking good. And I'm like, no, actually, I'm really sick.
It can be really invalidating.
Yeah. But, you know, you look good, so does it matter if you're sick?
Yeah.
I felt terrible.
Yeah.
And I put weight on and I'm very pleased about it.
Yeah.
I think like that's the other issue with it as well, is that, you know, because it is a spectrum, like there is no time where, you know, you're sick enough or you're, you know, bad enough that you need to get help. Like, as soon as you are starting to have these, you know, negative thoughts or negative behaviours with food, like that's the best time to, you know, nip it in the bud and get it under control before it does become too bad and you do have like a very, very serious, you know, eating disorder where it's been going on for so long that it's really, really hard, or much harder, to kind of change those behaviours.
Yeah. Katie, so you've mentioned that you've experienced disordered eating and an eating disorder. Do you think you'd be able to elaborate a little bit on what that experience was like for the audience?
So I think I had an eating disorder for about 13 years. I can definitely say body dissatisfaction developed quite young. I would have been roughly 8 at the time that I started becoming aware of body image and started to blame that for all of my problems. Eventually that led into development of a full-blown eating disorder. There are a lot of other things going on in the background, but I had a lot of the traits that predisposed me. I was an anxious, high achiever, perfectionist, obsessive, hardworking sort of person. The sort of person that I think stereotypically when eating disorders are seen as vanity, you would not think that that person would be someone who cared about what they look like per se. But for me, it was a coping mechanism for a lot of other things I couldn't deal with at that time. It was all consuming. 99-100% of my life was either focused on an eating disorder or grades and achievement. It was definitely reinforced by broader society as well, and definitely becomes almost part of your identity as well. So recovery from that has meant creating a whole new identity of who I am outside of that person. Honestly, it was probably one of the awful times of my life. Hospitalization was awful. You'd have comments from medical professionals. I was lying in hospital bed. One medical professional said to me, took my blood pressure and went, "Oh, you're just as healthy as I am." I was quite lucky, I guess, in a sense that I fit the stereotype of an eating disorder and got treatment. I know that other people aren't that fortunate. It was long-standing. My chronic illness probably played a role in that as well. And there was a lot of teasing out what is actual pain from the eating disorder versus, what is pain versus what is actually eating disorder symptoms. If I hadn't have dedicated everything to my recovery, I would not be able to manage my chronic illness.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So the next question looks at how eating disorders are so diverse. History largely presents us with disordered eating affecting thin, white, privileged women. But ethnicity, body size, neurodiversity, disability, sexuality, gender and community can be tied to experiences around body and food. And unique cultural forces contribute to the development of eating disorders. The question to the panel is, how do these experiences differ in people more broadly?
The experience of an eating disorder?
Yeah.
I think eating disorders do, as the illness has obviously lots of commonalities, but obviously the individual with illness is going to be very different. So although there's lots of things that are in common in terms of how we understand an illness and how we treat it, we also need to understand that person's experience of their illness and how that illness affects them, and that's going to be different. Absolutely, person to person. Is that kind of what you were referring to?
Yeah.
I've actually got a great example of that. I have 2 identical twins on my client list. One is very consumed with her body image. The other is very much using it as a coping mechanism for emotion. So even in 2 identical people, it can be an entirely different experience. I do work with neurodiverse clients as well, and they have their own unique individual needs. I work with queer identifying people as well, and that can create extra layers of complexity in that because their relationship with their body is very different to, say, a cis person, because they have issues with their body not matching their assigned gender as well, and sometimes the eating disorder becomes a way of fitting into those ideals.
Yeah, I think that really hits the nail on the head. The next question is, why for so long have we not recognised disordered eating and eating disorders as occurring beyond a small subset of the population?
I'd say that's diet culture. So I think diet culture and the weight loss industry and this idea that healthy is in this small BMI range and that anybody above that small range should be dieting, losing weight and doing the things that we recognise in an eating disorder in other body shapes and sizes. And then I guess also what Bridget was speaking to in terms of some of the other broader social justice issues and suppression and how that kind of plays a part in terms of different roles in society and what we think is okay for some people and not okay for other people. So I think it's only just recently that we've started to see that, yes, men can struggle with food and eating and body image as well. That's just not just a female issue. that older women can struggle with eating disorders, that people in a bigger body that lose weight are likely to be as unwell as somebody in a smaller body that loses weight. But I think our very narrow focus on what's healthy has very much like prohibited a lot of that.
I think in addition to that as well, like different cultures outside of Western culture, like, you know, different cultures that eat different foods that Western culture then, you know, rejects or doesn't recognize as being healthy, can also influence, you know, I guess like minorities and that kind of thing to be more at risk of developing disordered eating habits and that kind of thing, because they, you know, might feel shame or that kind of thing in terms of what their culture usually eats. But yeah, I think definitely like more minority groups and that kind of thing, because yeah, it's I guess eating disorders are generally thought of as being, yeah, like a thin white female who's like a young adult kind of thing. Whereas it affects so many other people outside of that, and you know, majority of them I suppose would be outside of that description. So I guess it's kind of downplayed in those populations as well.
Yeah, I wanted to add as well, fascinatingly, it was in around the time of World War II that we did the Minnesota semi-starvation experiment, which was quite pivotal in what we learned about eating disorders. And the experiment, for people who don't know, it was done in men. And what we learned from that study is that anybody can develop an eating disorder if they're subjected to starvation and they lose a significant amount of weight. So in fact, actually, we have known since World War II that anybody can develop an eating disorder, but for some reason, still in 2022, this is still like this novel idea that different body shapes and different genders and sexualities and walks of life can experience an eating disorder. So there's obviously still a lot of barriers there to be like broken down.
Yeah. Bridget, you've come to this panel, wanting, of course, and really helping us to be able to show that people in larger bodies have experiences of diet culture and eating disorders. What is your experience with diet culture?
If you give me a minute, I just wrote a few words on this in my mad prep today. So, the first time I went on a diet, I think I was in grade 9, so maybe 14-ish. And I went to Weight Watchers with my mum, as you do, a great mother-daughter bonding activity. And then, semi-formal diet, need to fit into the dress, formal, need to fit into the dress, 18th, need to look good, 21st, need to look good. And then in 2013, I came to an event at UQ, really similar to this, and learnt about health at every size. And it changed my life. Diets don't work. It's something, is it like 90%, Kira?
97% of people.
97% of people regain the weight that they lose, often plus some. Even the science says diets don't work. So then it was going on that journey of acceptance and coming to terms with, okay, a sense of loss that I'm never going to have the ideal body, and that's okay, I can be me. It doesn't mean that it's not hard sometimes, but it's also great not having to obsess about food or control or, it's just really freeing, I guess I'd say.
Thank you for sharing that.
Can I add, obviously not meaning to speak to your own lived experience, but as someone that has sat across people of different sizes experiencing body image concerns, I think a very important distinction to make is most people in Western society might have some internalized discontent about their bodies. And people with bigger bodies are also likely to receive like external, unsolicited comments about their bodies. So it's one thing to have body image issues within yourself, but it's another thing to have all of society continually telling you that you should be losing weight or that you should be dieting or you should be doing something. And think that that's, I feel like, an important difference. It's like we have a lot of work to do in terms of addressing diet culture and reducing the rates of eating disorders.
Definitely, thanks, Kira. And in privilege, it's a thing, guys. Like this lecture theatre, hell on earth. How am I going to balance my laptop on that table that I can't fit across my tummy? Like, that's life. That's life for people in bigger bodies.
I think there's also been like some horrific examples of like medical stigma and fat phobia in the broader media as well, that people are not getting treatment and ending up with stage 4 ovarian cancer that has gone undetected, being refused like life-changing surgeries, being told to lose weight first, however still being given access to bariatric surgery at the same weight.
Following on from that comment as well, I think like also the internalized, I guess like fear of seeking out medical help as well. I had a friend whose father had like obviously been following up with his GP, and his GP had recommended that he lose weight and whatever. And he started having symptoms of a heart attack, and he didn't want to go and see his GP because he was like, I haven't done any of the things to lose weight, I haven't lost any weight. You know, he didn't want to follow up with his GP because he was afraid that his GP would be mad at him for not losing weight. And he ended up in hospital and did have a heart attack. So, but he was okay. So that was good.
Yeah, I think that's so true. For such a long time, there's been such stigma around weight, and when people who are in larger bodies go to medical professionals, they are told to lose weight. And I guess the question I would put to the panel is, where do you think we are now on that issue? Do you think there's been improvement recently, or do you think things are still quite bad?
I think there's improvements. I mean, like there's these panels, there's the health at every size, there's improvements that we have like a really long way to go as well. And I guess I try and think of like weight stigma in the weight loss industry as hopefully being kind of similar to where we were with like cigarettes and smoking. Like there used to be a time where GPs would prescribe or recommend or encourage smoking of cigarettes, whereas we now know like no causes lung cancer. I kind of hope that like the weight loss industry follows a similar trajectory, and that what some people are still prescribing as being healthy, one day we all kind of see weight loss as being as harmful and toxic as smoking, and it's like very strongly discouraged. So yeah, I guess there's some improvements, a long way to go. Hopefully we're talking about weight loss industry like we're talking about smoking these days in the future sometime soon.
Sorry, Bridget.
I was just going to add, I feel like there's definitely more practitioners out there who are aware of this, but you've got to hunt them out. Like, it's not easy, but it's improving.
Another question I thought I would touch on, which I apologise I didn't send to you earlier, is related to gym culture. And I think we see a lot of young men going to the gym and use it as a really healthy activity in terms of mental health as well. But we also see a lot of young men obviously dealing with disordered eating. What would your opinion be on the current gym culture, and do you think what would the benefits and negative effects be of that paradigm?
I personally found it incredibly toxic because it was encouraged to exercise as much as you can. And yeah, that's okay. Or you can just have an active rest day. You don't actually need to rest. And never any sort of balance. And even in like the group classes, they're like talking about burning so many calories and then having a light dinner. I can't speak about it as an experience from a male, but I have seen within that culture that they're, using all of these supplements to try to grow muscle and doing very unhelpful things, I guess, to their long-term health in terms of like steroid use and wanting to change their bodies and like the dieting that they do before the comps, and then that leads to rebound eating. there's a whole lot of stuff in there that really mimics diet culture. And I think a lot of the people in there are like, no, I'm not doing anything wrong. This is good for my health, which kind of almost mirrors what you see in people with eating disorders too.
I think like diet culture has really like intrinsically linked exercise with, you know, how your body looks and your diet and all of that kind of thing, and, you know, using it as a way to just burn calories and, you know, lose weight essentially. Whereas exercise is so much more than that, and it shouldn't be just about, you know, doing it to lose weight, which I think a lot of the time people, you know, just think automatically, oh, I need to go to the gym because I've eaten this, or, you know, because I've gained weight, I need to get back into the gym. Whereas, you know, it can be something that's really positive for your mental health, for your cardiovascular health, like your fitness, all of those things which are so positive. Whereas we're kind of linking it with this really, you know, kind of negative thing of I need to do it to lose weight, and that's why I need to do it. And I think in terms of, yeah, with the link between like men and, you know, working out and that kind of thing, I think it kind of normalizes a lot of disordered eating behaviours, and it's just seen as, you know, oh, I'm bulking, I'm, you know, eating past the point of fullness so that I can grow muscle and, you know, look a certain way, or I'm cutting, so I need to be really hungry all the time and like eating really low amount of calories and, you know, feeling like crap all the time, having no energy, just so that I can look a certain way. So I think it is very, very much diet culture. Yeah.
I think there was a saying going around for a while, I'm not sure if it's still out there amongst the gym bros per se, that the day you pick up a weight is the day you forever look small. So always chasing that bigger muscle gain, which really kind of, when you flip that, sounds like diet culture as well.
It's just the opposite.
Yeah.
For men and women.
Yeah, absolutely. And I heard like the people that you know, the average person at the gym might see as a personal trainer or in the bodybuilding competitions, they're there because their genetics allow them to do that. And that's why they're in that, not because they work out in certain ways.
So the third section of the panel touches on how we can resist diet culture. So the first question in this section is, HAES, health at every size, and intuitive eating are concepts that are now gaining traction in the public sphere. To the panel, can you explain to the audience what these concepts mean?
I guess with intuitive eating is probably one I could talk to a bit better. For me, I think of it in terms of like, with diet culture, we have all these external things and rules based on, you know, arbitrary things like, you know, carbs are bad, fat is bad. It's always a new thing, and it's always these external rules, and we don't trust ourselves. We trust the rules that we're getting told to follow, which with intuitive eating, it's like intuitive. So internal cues, kind of, you listen, you trust your body, you kind of, it can be hard to get to that place after diet culture, but you're kind of, you know, you give yourself permission to eat and trust that you'll eat what you want and that your body will look after it. I guess it ties into HAES and that kind of not being worried about your weight and things like that in terms of dictating your eating. Things like reasons to eat, you know, instead of just for, you know, energy and energy out, you think of like enjoyment and social connection, you know, how it tastes and things like that. You know, just it's really moving towards that peaceful relationship with food that's kind of, dictated by you rather than, you know, shitty rules.
When it comes to health at every size, so it's not saying that every size is healthy, but it's saying every size can participate in like health-affirming behaviours. It has 5 components. I've got some notes. So weight inclusivity, so we include everyone. Health enhancement, so we can work towards, you know, health behaviours. So for example, instead of focusing on someone's weight, we might focus on someone's blood pressure and how can we manage that rather than the number on the scale. Respectful care, we've touched on sort of the medical profession and their approach to weight management. So respectful care is very important. We've got eating for well-being, so that ties into the intuitive eating. And the other one is life-enhancing movement. So joyful movement, don't go and do something because you have to burn that many calories. Go and do it because you like it. You like moving your body. It feels good for you. You feel strong and flexible and yeah.
For summary.
I think Hayes as well, what I talk to my clients about is like you can change, the amount of food you're eating and, exercise more, but your body has like really stronger forces at play to kind of keep you where you need to be. So I guess we call it like the set point. Everyone has a different set point. I guess there's this really good video on YouTube called Poodle Science. So that's kind of talking about, there's poodles and there's bulldogs and all, dogs have different genes, like humans have different genes, they all have different sizes. So, a big bulldog or something isn't going to look like a little chihuahua no matter how much it tries, and it could get there, but it will be really, sick, and it's going to take a lot of effort to do that. That's going to take into other areas of their life. So I guess it's knowing that, our body really wants to look after itself, and it's got all these mechanisms that, it turns down your metabolism when you eat less and things like that to try and keep you where you need to be, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of intuitive eating, just so our audience can hopefully get a better grasp of it, do you think you'd be able to provide an example of what that looks like?
Yeah, I guess it's different for everyone.
Yeah.
I think it's like, firstly, allowing yourself to have all food, so not having any rules about things, so you can choose like what you feel like. So one day you might, I don't know how to think of an example. Do you have any?
The thing that I was going to add to around like when you were saying like trusting your body, I think the bit to me maybe I would add to that is that to trust that if your weight goes up, it doesn't mean you're getting intuitive eating wrong. It means that your weight probably needed to go up.
Yeah.
So when we talk about body trust, it's not trusting it to do what we think it should do.
Yeah.
It's us trusting that our bodies have far more intuition and wisdom than what we do. So if you feel like you overeat one day, it may be likely that you needed more energy that day for whatever reason. If you just eat a whole bunch of sugary or high-fat foods, it's probably that your body needed those things on those days. So trusting your hunger cues, eat as much as you need to eat, but also trust the things that you're drawn to and that you are craving is probably a sign of your body's own internal wisdom and intuition, which I think as well Chelsea said can be pretty tricky to get to if you come off a history of any sort of dieting or being exposed to diet culture. But yeah, it's just starting to trust that and trust that whatever your weight does is what your body needs your weight to do.
I think as well, like you're saying, like trusting your body a lot more, because I think when people have had a history of dieting and they think, I don't think I can eat intuitively because I'll just eat, all of the food that I think is bad and, all of that kind of thing. But when you actually kind of allow yourself to have whatever food that you actually want, your body's actually really good at being like, I actually don't feel like eating 5 blocks of chocolate today. Like I kind of feel like a salad, or, I want the pizza, so I'll have the pizza, and then, I'll have vegetables at the next meal. And it kind of just evens out when you give yourself all of the choice. It's, you don't have that element of restriction where you're trying to break free of that and you're constantly battling that.
Just to add to that, like dieting disconnects us from our bodies, it disconnects us from our hunger cues, what we're needing, it gives us food rules, it tells us times to eat or not eat. So it's hard work to then have to like tune into that again, and it feels a bit scary. But once you sort of learn to trust, I'm hungry, yes, I'm hungry, I need to have something to eat. That's really liberating, and it's so much easier and less stressful to live that way.
This is and the amount of headspace that's freed up, like all of the thinking and calculating rules and analysing and double checking, that could be going towards currently cure for cancer. Instead of trying to analyse every meal. So it just frees up the space for far more meaningful thought and cognition. And I think when intuitive eating was first introduced to me as well, the example that was kind of offered was when you're trying to feed a baby. So you try and feed a baby food, they get to a point where they're not eating that food anymore. Like they're telling you, like, I've had enough food. Like we all have that intuition as well. We're just going to keep eating. Like if we listen to that intuition, like our bodies will tell us when to start eating and when to stop. Like Bridget and Chelsea have all said, like eating disorders and disordered eating and diet culture just disrupt all of those normal cues that we're all born with.
I can definitely confirm the bit about having more brain space. I remember the first time I suddenly had more space, I was like, I don't actually know what to do with myself. I'm gonna have to get hobbies. I guess also for me, intuitive eating looks quite different, and I know for some people it's not always accessible. Eating disorder recovery is expensive. And I've found for many people that can be a real barrier because sometimes you don't have the money to buy the food that you're craving. And sometimes, I'm sure most uni students know, sometimes you do live on noodles and beans and rice for weeks at a time. So sometimes intuitive eating isn't accessible. And I think maybe sometimes that's not actually spoken about. For me, intuitive eating is obviously not accessible. And I'll probably never be able to do that. However, I can kind of confirm, like my body does know what it wants. When I was on a very strict low fiber diet, all I wanted was plates and plates of vegetables. Now I can have little bits of food, and I guess my kind of bit of intuitive eating is that I can have tiny bits of food, but I'm actually now eating for taste, and that's something that I actually get to enjoy. So I can have little bits of chocolate, and that's because I want a little bit of chocolate and I really like the taste.
Can I add as well, like intuitive eating sometimes as well as also using your wisdom that you need to eat even when you don't feel like eating. So I know sure probably like the majority of people in the room unfortunately had COVID a couple of weeks ago, like had no appetite. But like my intuitive eating was like, I don't feel like eating, I have no appetite, I'm nauseous, but I know that I need to eat, I know that my body needs fuel. So I think that that's also like a little bit of like using that wisdom and that not thinking I cannot eat to lose weight, but like my body needs fuel to recover, my body needs fuel to be able to get well and to do its normal functions is also part of like intuitive eating.
The next question, which I think touches on something we may have already talked about, but the second part of the question was how can we look at how we treat our bodies, or how can we ourselves start changing the way we look at food and how we treat our bodies?
One thing is, buying clothes that fit you, not clothes you want to fit into, is probably a big one. And maybe even clothes that are a little bit bigger, so you've got room to grow. I guess that's one thing that really, because you can just walk around and feel more comfy, I guess, and you don't have to change yourself for the clothes. That's one thing in terms of, going against diet culture and body acceptance.
I think so, like not commenting on other people's weight or shape, negatively or positively, and also putting in boundaries and asking people to not comment on your weight and shape. It's very easy to think about your weight and shape less when you're complimented or commented on it less. And we often joke at work, like our little bubble where there are like no appearance related comments. It's actually in everybody's contracts. And then kind of the stark shock that you get to hear that other people are faced with those comments all of the time. So I think, a big thing that we can all do is stop commenting on other people's bodies and ask other people to not comment on our bodies.
I think as well, like focusing more on how things make you feel rather than focusing on, the things that you can't change or the things that you can't control is something that I, say a lot to a lot of my clients, because a lot of them will be very focused on their appearance or their weight and that kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, well, how about we focus on how these things are going to impact you positively, or how, eating more food makes you feel. It gives you more energy. It makes you feel just happier in general, like you can live your best life. Finding movement that makes you feel good rather than focusing on, doing a workout that's going to burn the most calories, or, that kind of thing as well. So I think focusing more on doing things that improve your quality of life and make you feel good, because then a lot of the time you kind of take a lot of that focus away from how you look, or focusing on your weight instead of, because that's the main point of life, like feeling good, rather than who cares how you look.
For me, my own personal thing was actually taking back and feeling like I was in control of my body. That meant me choosing to dress in a way that actually made me feel like my authentic self. As you can all tell, my hair is very bright and multicolored. That is something that I do purely for myself because it's something that I like. I also like tattoos, so I get tattoos on my body because I'm then in control of my body. More broadly, I think it's looking at, does my body need to fit a certain size to live the life that I want to live, and having something more outside of that I valued than the way my body looked. For me, that was like getting into my master's and wanting to work in the area, and that was actually the thing that motivated me to leave a lot of my eating disorder concerns behind, because I had something to move forward to. Also thinking about who's in your friend circle as well and what do they value. Sometimes that means letting go of people who are very consumed in body image and having friends that more align with your value system.
I think in terms of your question about food, I guess the dietitians always say all food is morally neutral, no food is always good and no food is always bad. So I don't know, whatever the current superfood is, whatever that is, let's say kale, and I'm going to move behind the time. But if you only eat kale, that's going to be severely unhealthy. Yeah. And actually eating sugar and lollies is perfectly appropriate and healthy in some circumstances. So a marathon runner is not going to be packing his pocket full of broccoli. He's going to be taking lollies and sugar. The malnourished grandmas in the retirement village, we add sugar to their coffee and their tea to try and add weight on. So all food plays a role. It all has a purpose, and no single food is inherently bad or inherently good.
I think to add to that, just approach food and movement with a sense of curiosity. I want to try that, instead of thinking, oh no, it's bad for me. Actually go, I want to see what it tastes like, and actually, oh, I really like that, or oh no, that wasn't for me. So then you're starting to go off personal preference, and again, what your body is telling you that it needs and wants, rather than the food will say, this is bad and I shouldn't eat it.
So as professionals, when treating people with disordered eating or body image concerns, what kind of interventions work?
I feel very passionately about at least starting with evidence-based treatments. So I think it's the treatments that we know have the most evidence to work for most people. They might not necessarily work for everybody or at every stage of someone's recovery, but I think that we need to at least offer them and try them first. And then I suppose there's no crystal ball, it's going to need to be the right therapist at the right time. It needs to be the priority for that person. And something that didn't work at some stage might work at a different stage with a different clinician or a different point in somebody's life. So I guess the evidence at the moment is that the leading treatment for adolescents and young people aged under 19 with an eating disorder is family-based therapy. And the leading treatments for adults with eating disorder are cognitive behavioural therapy for eating disorders, mantra, are the two kind of leading ones. And then some of the other ones are interpersonal therapy for bulimia and binge eating disorder, DBT for eating disorders. So there's evidence for a couple, but I guess our leading ones are family-based therapy and cognitive behavioural therapy for eating disorders.
I found that, like, yes, you've got a manualised therapy and it says 20 to 40 sessions. That's never right. It's a long journey, I think, to full recovery. And it really requires like a holistic, I think, approach, because there's so much more going on. And I think if, you're not working on that, you're not addressing the risk then that the eating disorder can come back as well in those times of vulnerability. So my treatment was long. It was definitely more than the sort of 20 to 40 sessions because it needed to be. And I think they definitely need to address all areas of life going on as well. It's not just about food and eating and gaining weight.
Can I respectfully disagree and say I think that's some people's experience. I'm not for a second trying to invalidate your experience. And I also think that we need to hold in mind that for some people that it can be 20 or 40 sessions. And the reason I say that is I think a lot of people can be really daunted about this idea that an eating disorder is something you always need to live with, you just have to manage. That's absolutely not the case, like full recovery is possible. Or that we kind of tend to make assumptions that this person might have really complex trauma or lots of other issues going on. And while that sometimes is the case, we're also, if someone has an eating disorder, we're also meeting someone whose brain is severely affected and their life has been severely affected. So helping them restore their weight and reverse malnutrition, we might find that they're a completely different person and no further treatment is needed. So I guess again I would say I think that we need to give everybody the benefit of the doubt that the evidence-based treatment will work effectively for them until proven otherwise. And obviously there's going to be instances where people are going to need a different treatment or extended treatment or additional treatment alongside their eating disorder treatment. I don't know if you want to speak back to that.
No, I definitely get where you're coming from, because I've treated people myself who, when we intervene early, tend to have really, really good outcomes, or they come in and they're highly motivated and they're completely ready to do the treatment. But I think it's also tricky too in navigating the needs of the individual as well.
I might add to that, there's a wonderful fat activist called Nick McDermott. She's very passionate about this issue, and the evidence-based treatments like CBT were tested and researched on a population that were severely underweight. So how does that then apply to someone in a bigger body, and do we have the evidence for that yet?
I think that's the difference between evidence-based practice and practice-based evidence as well. What do we see works when we're in the room with someone?
So the last question for this evening is, what can we do as individuals to begin changing the public discourse around dieting and body image?
I think the number one thing I would say is weight loss is always a red flag. Weight loss is not something to be celebrated or praised. Weight loss is a sign that someone could have an illness, an eating disorder, they could die, they could have cancer. So if we start to respond to seeing someone lose weight with concern as opposed to praise, I think that will significantly change the discourse around bodies, diet culture, and more people with eating disorders will be detected earlier on and get the treatment that they need.
I think also being the change that you want to see, and questioning people when they do make comments on your weight or on other people's bodies as well, and being hey, I'd prefer if you didn't comment on someone's weight because it makes me feel like this, or I don't think we need to make a comment like that about someone because it's not really relevant to anything.
I think there's something to be said also for fat activism as well. I can't speak to your experience of that either, but you think about we've got this whole level of stigma up here that needs to be addressed, and it even goes up right to policy level. You think about when the governments are putting in weight loss strategies for the general population and putting all this money towards something that we don't actually have any evidence that works. And then actively addressing that at an individual level, like when you see someone engaging in that, calling them out.
I think that's really good.
I was just going to say, like, don't give it airtime, like, shut it down. If people are talking about, oh, you look great, in the office, like, change the subject. And also, like, if you want to get involved in discussions on social media and stuff, it can be hard to engage all the time, and I don't engage all the time. I'm like, I don't have the capacity to do this, and that's okay. But sometimes I will be brave, and I will refute and handle it a day's notice. But be brave. If you feel you have the capacity to be brave in that moment, do it.
I think there's also this belief, or like this, what is it? I guess this system of beliefs, that was hard for me to unlearn at first, is that no one really owes us health kind of thing. I think we've got this belief that everyone owes each other a healthy life for some reason. Like, I think the main thing that started is don't overrun the hospital system or something. So I think if we target that as well and we kind of question that bias, like, it actually, not everyone does have to be healthy. Like, people can be healthy in their own ways, and we can respect that. But the next level is also being like, people don't have a moral obligation to health and not being like offended by some. Like, I think that's why we care so much about what other people are doing sometimes, because for some reason it's this moral obligation. So maybe questioning that bias as well. And I know it was something for me, because I guess working in the health field and learning at uni and stuff, I really had to unlearn that and be like, it's not really my business, it doesn't really affect me. Yeah.
I really strongly agree with that, because as someone who's chronically ill, I'm never going to be healthy, but if you took my feeding tube off my face, people would make an assumption about me by the way that I look. And that really goes to say we can't actually judge anyone's health by the way that they look. We think about, we see that this extra weight adds to, all of these negative outcomes, but so does being male. When it comes to cardiac risk, at least. And no one's telling people to stop being male, but we've got some belief of controllability over weight that we're actually telling people, you can control that so you can do something about your health. But we actually know weight is very much not controllable, and there are so many different factors that go into determining someone's weight. And look, a lot of the studies that have looked at improved health outcomes, I was reading one recently where I think they were looking at diabetics, and they put them on a highly restrictive diet. Their levels, I think it was the A1C levels, dropped in the first year, but regardless of whether people actually regained that weight or not, their levels returned to where the baseline was. So yet they still wanted to push that people should aggressively lose weight in type 2 diabetes despite no long-term improvement. Another study I interestingly read defined weight loss in people of, I think, 100 plus kilos. Successful weight loss over a 5-year period was 3 kilos.
I think as well, like when we're having the health conversation, is we can just zoom out as well and remember that health is like physical, but it's emotional, it's social, it's vocational. And I remember an individual who I met who had improved her physical health as a result of weight loss, at least short term. But as a result, she was too scared to go out and socialise because she might lose control of her food and eating. She was having arguments with her partner. She couldn't concentrate at work anymore because she was always hungry and her cognitive capacity had been reduced. And she was obsessive all the time and had low mood and she was tired. So like, good job, your blood cholesterol levels are lower, your mental health is worse, your job performance is worse, your relationship satisfaction is worse. So like, is this actually healthier? So yeah, we need to think about health as also being someone's well-being and how they function in their life as well. And like Chelsea was saying as well, health might not be a priority for somebody either. someone might just be like getting through and dealing with some trauma in their lives. Dealing with their physical health is not going to be something that's within their capacity or a high priority for them. So yeah, to circle back, I think what we can also do is start to think more broadly about health and have maybe a more balanced and helpful view of what healthy actually is.
And I think when you said that, it ticked another thing in my mind as well, because I agree with zooming out in terms of people's priorities and how it affects them, but also people's ability and capacity in terms of like big things like socio-economic status and like the social determinants of health. So some people don't even have a choice of they have less choice sometimes of how they can make health changes. So sometimes it's not even up to choice, it's, privilege and things like that as well. That's another way to zoom out, as well as different factors of health too.
I think recently the Centre for Integrative Health's Instagram page put up that postcode is more predictive of health than weight.
Okay, so we have some time now at the end for questions from the audience. I can give you a few seconds to think, but if anyone does have a question, please raise your hand. Yeah, feel free to speak up.
I'm just interested because obviously we've spent a lot talking about diet culture, but are there any, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on how much culture just in itself impacts the way that we learn to think about food. So I know that, for example, in Europe, a meal is so much more than just food and it's ritual. It helps you sort of having that ritual also gets you to think about your wisdom eating, as we talked about before. It gets you to appreciate taste. I know that in schools overseas, not just in Europe, but all over the world, kids will go home to have lunch, they'll be with their family, they'll take a whole hour, they'll really sort of have like that 4-course meal. And so it's not just about sitting at your desk, like quickly eating a sandwich in like 20 minutes while you're still staring at the screen. And I'm just wondering, how much that impacts as well, sort of what you all do as professionals when you're trying to help people overcome eating disorders. Do you talk about what the ritual can mean? Is that part of the solution?
I think there's a lot that you said that's a lot of values to raise and raising some of the points that you've raised. I suppose speaking to your first question around like diet culture versus general culture, I can't remember exactly what year it was, but they showed that the year that like television was introduced to Hawaii, I think, that there was a significant increase in the rates of eating disorders, a culture that previously hadn't been reporting the same degree of body image and eating concerns. So diet culture can disrupt cultures in of themselves. But we also know that something like having family meals together is a very big protective factor from anybody living in diet culture from developing an eating disorder. So I guess, to speak to your point, diet culture disrupts culture, and there's things that we can do to like protect ourselves from diet culture and the kind of cultural practices that we have around food and eating. Maybe the dietitians have a few more things to add to that as well.
I think it's a really good concept to think about. It actually hasn't come up in my work so far. I guess I see people in the first 6 weeks of treatment, so we kind of just get to things while we're at the very pointy end. But I think definitely down the track it would be a really good thing to cover and talk about.
I think kind of like what you were saying in terms of like having that more social aspect of eating and not it just being about the food and hyper focusing on that. Because I find like obviously when you bring more joy into eating and kind of experiencing food, it kind of takes off that pressure of it just being something that is going to affect your body in that more kind of clinical sense.
Yeah, and food is more than just fuel. Like it is the way that we connect with people, we share with people. It's the way we celebrate. Like there's the iconic birthday cake. If we're sad, we might eat. So food is really just so much more than fuel.
You guys have sort of touched on this a little bit, the relationship between research and what are kind of fallacies about food, weight, body image. And I think it's interesting because there's obviously a lot of social issues that have been really shaped by the bias that exists in scientific research. Scientific research, I think, has played a big role in defining who we see as human and what we see as valuable and stuff like that. And I guess as practitioners too, we know that like science informs, research informs practice and stuff like that. So I'm interested to know, like, what if you each had to sort of pick something that got a greater focus in research, and like things that maybe you know as practitioners that you would like to be more validated in like a research space, what would you like those things to be?
I think we need to have like a research student come work in the practice, because we're always continually talking about, we need to publish some data on this, we need to collect some more outcomes around this. I'm pretty motivated to release some of the outcomes in our practice around CBT and bigger bodies after this panel discussion. Also, I think something that we're pretty passionate about in our practice is supporting people to restore 100% to whatever their pre-morbid weight was, irrespective of how high that weight was. And I really, I think that we would have a pretty strong case to make in terms of people can't get completely well if their bodies aren't completely well again. And I would like us to be doing more research about what happens when we restore someone back 100% to their weight versus when we choose some arbitrary healthy BMI to try and fit everybody into that box. So I guess, that would be my two, broadening out the sample size and the participants in the CBT, and then also more research about the need for 100% weight restoration.
To go as well. I think definitely, more research into, I think eating disorders in large bodies and, more evidence-based guidelines in that department, I think, because I don't think there's, a very large sample of research in that area.
I think more just research in general on effective treatment as well, and whether that looks like a manualised treatment or whether that is an eclective treatment kind of protocol, because you get these studies and they've got a protocol and you follow it through, but you also get people who drop out in that, and why did they drop out? What were the reasons for it? Were they not ready? Was it not a fit to them? And looking, I think I've said practice-based evidence as well, and how does that look in individual case studies as well, and does that generalise to a population? Because we're taking these research participants, but we don't know if that applies to the person that's sitting in front of us always.
Yes.
So going back to what you guys were talking about before with BMI, do you think that's probably playing into this obsession we have with fitting into this tiny little box, even though, even myself growing up having, issues with bodies, like I'm sure everybody does, but I never fit into a BMI box even when I was 10. Even though we know BMI is rubbish, why is it still sticking around? Why are people still constantly looking at this BMI stuff? Even my GP is still your BMI's a bit up, and I'm like, yeah, that's shit. So why does it always come back to this BMI thing?
Just because there's so much about BMI that's absolute rubbish. And one of the things that's to me that's just completely ridiculous BMI in of itself is that if anyone knows the cutoffs, apparently BMI of 25 to 30 is overweight range and 30 above is obese.
There was a Lancet study of 900,000 people that they followed longitudinally over the course of their lives, and they wanted to measure life expectancy and chronic illness. And the BMI category that they actually found to live the longest and be the healthiest was a BMI of 25. If we're saying the BMI range that lives the longest and is the healthiest is overweight, where did any of that come from? Another thing that's ridiculous, and there's so much about it, but just a little bit really blatantly obvious, is that the healthy BMI range is 18.5 to 25. However, we know that most women in general cannot have a regular menstrual cycle with a BMI under 20. So how can we say that you're healthy if you're not performing your normal bodily functions? And if you let me keep going, I'll just keep ripping the BMI. I honestly don't know why we still use it. It's quick, it's easy. It's just being dropped into people, but it has no validity.
And it wasn't developed to say it wasn't developed as a measure of someone's health. It was. I did some research today. Apparently, it was developed by a mathematician to find out the average human being. Yeah. It's not about health.
In our clinic, we use height and weight trajectory. So if someone's always being the 97th percentile, they're always going to need to be the 97th percentile. So their estimated weight range is going to be the 97th percentile. If someone's always been the 40th percentile, probably expect that, and they've been okay, they've thrived as expected, they're probably always going to sit at the 40th percentile. So we very much believe in trying to figure out where someone was tracking before there were big changes and just supporting them in moving back to whatever normal was for them. The other thing that, you started the BMI conversation. The other thing that really fascinates me when I talk to GPs and but they're above average weight, I'm I wasn't great at maths, but one thing I remember is not everyone can be average. There has to be above and below for average to exist. So the fact that we're trying to make everyone average just makes no mathematical sense to me. I'll leave there.
And was it in 1998 they changed the definition of overweight from 27 to 25 for no real reason? I think they said it was easier to remember.
Yes.
I guess with bingo being this and the thing being early intervention, I think Chelsea touched on some of the warning signs that you might see in someone behaviourally for disordered eating or eating disorders. As practitioners, what advice would you give to people who are concerned about someone that they know who might have some eating or body image concerns, and how do you start that conversation in a safe space?
I guess today is Are You OK Day as well, so it could be a good opportunity if you think tonight you want to talk to someone, or this week, check in. But I guess it's a hard conversation to have, and I think you have to be there to kind of listen to what they might say as well. So I think, looking out for the signs in terms of behaviours, kind of just if you see any change in demeanour at all, lower mood, or just kind of disengaged and not doing things socially, or they're just not really there when you're hanging out with them. They're not coming to things with food. There's heaps of signs if anyone wants to have some more.
I think the biggest one is we've been talking about the weight loss is normal. Yeah. So we know that when someone loses weight, it negatively affects their whole brain, their body. The brain becomes obsessive, preoccupied, depressed. The body slows down, it becomes fatigued. There's difficulties with heart rate and blood pressure. So and what we've talked about is 97% of people who lose weight put it back on because their body wants to go back to what's normal for them. So I think if you see that someone's lost weight, just asking, are you okay? I've noticed that you've lost weight, and normally weight loss is a sign of disease and illness. We're saying, are you okay? And I honestly have had that conversation with people before, obviously, in the space that I work in now, people would know, but previous to working in eating disorders, someone I worked with who was previously in a much bigger body and lost a significant amount of weight, I just asked him, like, hey, I've noticed that there's been a really big reduction in your weight and I'm really concerned about you. Are you okay? And he said, you're the first person that said that, and thank you so much, because I feel like there's somebody now that I can speak to about all of the pressures and how hard it is, whereas everybody else has just been giving me praise and pats on the back. So yeah, I think like weight loss would probably be the biggest one that I would say you need to see as a red flag and just ask someone if they're okay.
And also not everyone who is struggling will necessarily have lost weight. It can be more about the behaviours, I think, as people have mentioned before, but it might be that they're socially withdrawing as well, that they're spending a lot of time thinking about food and exercise or talking about that as well, and avoiding you to exercise or only doing activities with you if they don't involve food but involve being physically active. Like they might start being like, oh yeah, we can go do this thing together because we'll be walking around the whole day, but they won't go to the movies with you.
Yes.
I work in the exercise space, so very regularly come across those comments that people make about their body. One that's really common is if I haven't seen someone for a while, they'll come in and say, I feel fat. And sometimes it's easier to have those conversations one-on-one, but in a group setting, what's your advice on how to respond to that, to validate their experience that they're obviously feeling uncomfortable, but then shut down that diet talk, particularly in, I guess, something bigger, like a group setting where other people can hear your response and the other person's response?
Yeah, I think like if someone said that to me one-on-one, how I would address it, I guess it's a bit difficult and a bit more tricky in a group setting, but I love that that's a question that you've got to this panel and it's like you're going to go away and think about it. Just goes to show that the panel already has been helpful in starting some of the conversations that need to happen. I think even if it's just something that like gets the person kind of thinking, if it's like, you know, fat is not a feeling, and or to say that you like are feeling fat and that's a bad thing. Some people live in bodies that are fat and we're therefore saying that that is a bad thing. Like maybe it's just like one or two sentences that they just kind of go away and think about, that saying something like that is that I feel fat, but it's not helpful in describing how they feel. But it's also pathologizing people's bodies and it's not helpful to anybody else that's in the room to hear that. Yeah, I've when I work with young people in particular, it could be anyone, like one-on-one, when we've talked about the fact that fat is not a feeling, and for a while it's like, no, it is. Is that like real annoyance? And it's like, well, it's like nut it out a little bit more. When you go to somebody and say, I feel fat, what do they generally say back? They're like, oh, like, no, you're not fat. Like, okay, do you feel any better? No. Okay, so maybe it's like you saying a meal's bad, like it's ambiguous. Like it doesn't tell you, was it too hot, too cold, was it off, was it too salty? Like it doesn't really explain what's going on for someone. So what would we go through and think, like, are you feeling angry, sad, anxious, ashamed, guilty? Like, let's actually get clear on what it is. And then when they're able to figure out what they're feeling, like, what would it be like now to notice people in your life? Instead of saying I feel fat, you say I feel really anxious, I feel really sad, and I feel really angry. What do you think people in your life would do then? You're going to get like a much different response. So I think like saying that someone feels fat is not only like a very ineffective way of them actually articulating their emotions, getting their needs met, but it's also perpetuating obviously weight stigma and making like fat a bad thing. Sorry, did I go a little tangent again?
That was great. I think that was really well put, Kira. I might reflect like, oh, you feel uncomfortable in your body. Because I feel like when someone says, I feel fat, it's, I don't feel good, I feel sluggish, like I feel yuck. So how can I reflect that sense to them without saying, I feel fat?
I think the other bit though, like you're still like saying, you're still using fat as a shortcut to describe bad, like sluggish, uncomfortable. And I think like the weight-centric part around that is still insinuating that fat is associated with bad. So like I agree, it's a much kinder way of approaching the person that's made the comment, but I would also be thinking like, what about the people in the room hearing that comment that are in a bigger body, that are hearing that like fat is then bad, if that's how we describe our experience. Yeah.
Great. Well, we've run out of time for the evening, but I'd like you all to invite me in a round of applause for our panellists.